Now, the other thing that's really interesting to think about is we work successively in the minefield. So you'll start at the border and you'll clear that. And then the next day, you move in deeper. So the area you're walking on today is the area your rat cleared yesterday. So you have to trust your rat every time you step into that minefield, because everywhere you are walking, your rat has searched.
Hi, Cindy. What do you do, and where are you, and what is the organization? Because it's so unusual and incredible.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Dr. Cindy Fast. I'm the head of training and innovation with a nonprofit organization called propel. And we are based in Tanzania, and our main mission is to solve pressing humanitarian challenges with scent detection animals. And the animal that we have focused on over more than 20 years now is the African giant pouched rat. So we train this giant rat to detect landmines. It's really important to point out that the rat safely does this, and also now to detect tuberculosis.
Wow. So how did you get interested in this, Cindy?
Well, so my background is in animal behavior and actually behavioral neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
So I had worked a lot with rats and all sorts of other animals, always loved animals. And I was really interested in how learning and memory interacts to guide decisions and behaviors. And then I did a postdoc position looking at the sense of smell. And at first I didn't care at all about the sense of smell. I almost didn't even join the lab because I thought nobody really needs to smell things. You know, we need to see stuff. We need to be able to hear things. But we could live without the sense of smell. But I joined the lab because they had a really exciting research showing that based on your expectations, it could change how you perceive things that you're smelling. So just because you expect to smell something, it changes the sensation of it. So it was really fascinating stuff. And after being involved in that research, I came to really appreciate the sense of smell and value it.
Now, smell, we've made great advances in sight, in sensory and touch with haptics and things, but smell is a very difficult thing for us to sort of figure out, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's such a complicated system, complex at that. And there's so much that we don't really understand. There's so many interactions. And that's what I found so fascinating is even if you are able to look inside the brain of an animal as it's smelling something, just trying to track where that signal goes to is overwhelming. And then when you start adding on that your expectations color your perceptions and what state you're in emotion-wise. I mean, when we think about, you hear a favorite song and it instantly takes you back to a time and place. Mm-hmm. But the same thing happens with smell. You smell an apple pie baking and you remember grandma's house at Thanksgiving.
And, we as human beings, we sort of transpose our idea of the way we interact with the world on top of an animal. So like we think that a dog would see the same way that we do, but they see very different wavelengths of light. They interact with the world in a different way and they smell differently. So, my dog just takes a walk in the neighborhood and is thoroughly entertained by each different smell. So how did you get to rats?
Well, so yeah, that's the story there is I had kind of came to that point in my academic career where I said, I love animals, I love research, I love learning and memory and the neuroscience behind those things, so what's going on in the brain, but how do I put this to good use? And I happened to have a social media post that said that Apopo was looking for someone that met my description, and I had read about Apopo years prior and was fascinated by their work. So I happened to look it up and the deadline to apply was the same day. So without even hesitating, I applied, went home that night and told my husband, hey, I applied for a job in Africa. Yeah. And now we're here.
Now that's a big move to go from UCLA to Tanzania. When you first got there, was it a culture shock? Had you spent much time in Africa before?
No, funny story. I didn't even have a passport when I applied for this job. So
Right.
first time in Africa, but it's amazing that I think the diversity that I experienced in LA really prepared me for coming to Tanzania. If you happen to go downtown in the arts district, there's so much diversity as you just travel across LA from, downtown to the coast.
Yeah.
And I felt the same when I came to Tanzania. You go from a big city in Dar es Salaam when you land on the plane, and then you travel out to Morogoro where we're at. And all of the shops and the rich culture just reminded me of walking the streets of downtown LA.
Now it's quite beautiful in Tanzania. How do you feel about the beauty and the diversity of animals that you have there?
It still hasn't gotten old. 5 years later, every morning I wake up and I see the beautiful Uluguru Mountains, and it takes my breath away. And I'm always excited when I see a bush baby visiting me at my house, or we spot a chameleon somewhere. And actually, where we're positioned in Tanzania, it's only about an hour drive away from a national park. So we can hop in the car, go for a drive, and see elephants and lions. It's absolutely amazing.
I want to ask the question around to get really into, we hear it so much. Dogs can sniff out cancer. You hear all of these different sort of ways which we're using animals to detect disease. So, but how do we train the animals? So how do you actually train a rat, first of all for the landmine, but then now you're doing it with tuberculosis. What is that process, and what is the lifespan of a rat, and how smart are they? I mean, I don't think of rats as, I want to hear, because I'm afraid of rats. So this might change everything.
It's such a loaded question. So rats are absolutely intelligent. They're curious by design. So I always tell everyone a rat is either afraid or they're curious. And when they're curious is when they're going to learn things. And they're absolutely experts at problem solving, especially if it involves getting food. So if they can come up with some clever way to get to a tasty food reward, they're going to figure that out. So that's the first part. Now, our rats are special because not only are they giant, but they also live a long time. So their average lifespan is about 8 or 9 years in captivity. We have a retired rat here that we just celebrated his 10th birthday with him. So they can live a nice, long, productive career and then retire after that, much like dogs would do. I love how you guys actually set this up, probably without knowing, is that these are the steps of training. The very first step I always tell everyone is who's training who. So you have to know who you're working with. So you have to know your animal and how do they perceive their world and interact with it, and what do they naturally do. So our rats are naturally nocturnal, so they don't have very good vision, but they have an incredible sense of smell. So we capitalize on their curiosity by keeping them socialized to humans, so nothing bad happens when they're around us. And then we just start the training process of rewarding them for doing small steps towards our target behavior.
So there's a huge problem with landmines, right? And so how do you identify that that's the problem you're going to work on first off?
Well, it actually was an idea from an engineering student back in 1997. Our founder, Bart Legions, was at a university in Belgium, and he was tasked as part of a course to come up with a solution for landmine problems. And he had pet rats as a child, and he'd also visited Africa. So this was starting to come together. He came across a paper where someone had trained hamsters to detect explosives. And he said, well, if hamsters can do it, I'm sure rats can do it. And there's a big problem with landmines in Africa. So I want to focus my solution on that continent. And it just so happened there was a professor at the University of Antwerp, also in Belgium, that was collaborating with the university here in Tanzania, where we are still partnering. And they had a center called the Pest Management Center. So their focus was on helping to manage pests that were for the agriculture. And one of the biggest pests was our African giant pouched rat. So they came together and decided actually this rat might be the perfect solution because he is so large. He can travel large areas of land without tiring. He lives a long time. He has a great sense of smell, but he's too light to actually set off a landmine. So he can walk directly on top of them without detonating them. So that's how it came together.
What is the behavior that a rat, what happens where they know, okay, there's a landmine? What do they do? And then what do you feed them as a reward?
So what they do is kind of relative. We found we can train them to do a number of things to tell their handler when they found TNT or a landmine. But the most common thing we train the rat to do is just scratch at the surface. So we start this off very simply. We give them a metal tea egg, like a metal diffuser, and fill it with TNT. The curious rat runs over and starts playing with this smelly toy, and we make a click sound that the rat has already learned means food's coming. And the food that he really likes is bananas. So we give him a banana reward every time he goes and touches that tea egg. And then we start burying the tea egg below the ground. Now the rat has to sniff it out. And when he does, he's trying to get at it with his front paws, so he's scratching. And then we click and give him the banana reward. And we just kind of build up from there.
How long does that take?
The entire training process takes about a year. But it starts from the time the rat first opens his eyes at 4 weeks old. That's when we start handling him and letting him know the world is a friendly place. You don't need to be afraid. And then he starts official training at 10 weeks old when he's weaned from his mother. And then all of the stages, depending on how complex it is, have different lengths. So some of those basic steps might only be a week or two, but those more advanced stages where we're working in our actual minefield here at our training facility that's filled with deactivated mines, those stages could take 6 months alone.
How do you know when the rat's ready?
We have internal accreditation, which is adopted from International Mine Action Standards. So we have a blind test that the rat must pass. And blind means that the handlers and trainers don't know where the mines are at. And the person taking the notes and scoring what the rat is doing also does not know where the mines are at. So we just sit there and watch the rat. He has to search 200 square meters in 2 consecutive days. So that's a total of 400 square meters. He has to find every single landmine and make no more than 1 false indication. So after the rat has finished the test, we take our maps back to the database and enter in, and then we find out if he passed or not. So if he passes that, he goes to the operations, and there's external accreditation where he has to pass that same test before he can go to work.
How far away from the rat do you have to be to because you can't be close to it, because if the mine explodes, you'll get caught in the explosion. So how far does the rat go away from you?
So there's actually not a risk to the handlers because the rat cannot detonate it. But of course, you don't want a handler to step on a landmine, right? So this works in sort of concert with other assets for the mine action. So you'll have vegetation cutters that will come in and clear the ground to give a safe walking path. And then we'll have manual deminers working with metal detectors that will clear those paths. So then we know the handlers are safe to walk on that path only.
Right.
And then the rat actually walks in between 2 handlers.
So Cindy, do you get emotionally attached to these particular rats? And then do they leave your world and they go with somebody else, or do you keep them with you? How does it work?
So I probably shouldn't get attached, but I do. And each one of our rats have unique personalities. So everybody, I think, has their favorites. But honestly, I think it's more like a proud moment, a proud parent moment when we see our rats go off. So we hold little celebrations and we wish them well. And then when they're being deployed, we get constant feedback about how they're doing. So we also hold celebrations back here when, our rats have found something, they've cleared a new minefield. So it really is a team effort, and we stay with the rat throughout his whole career.
Now, I have a question about that. When they're out looking for the mines, they're not on a leash, right? I mean, or are they? I mean, how do they not run away? What's that process?
That's one of the first things that I was surprised about when I came to Tanzania. So I'd read all about a popo. I understood the training process. There wasn't too much culture shock. But when I went to the training field, I was amazed that the rats just followed their trainers throughout the field. And we don't explicitly train them to do that. They do it. So this is a safety feature in the minefield that if a rat were to get loose, he's not going to take off running somewhere. He stays right with his handler. But when he's searching that area of suspected minefield, he's actually tethered on a rope between two handlers. So then we also know that he's systematically searching every inch of that minefield. So he walks back and forth between the handlers and searches that entire area.
How big is this? These rats? Is it like, because it sounds like it's like a small dog or something?
Bigger than a small dog. I think our rats would be much bigger than like a Chihuahua. I would say a small cat.
Oh my God. How much do they weigh typically?
This is so funny because, I'm American, so it's always the standard system. But since I've been here, we weigh the rats in metric system. So it's the largest rats are about 1.5 kilos. And I think that's around, like 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds?
Yeah, that's a fairly big rat. I mean, the other thing is like of all the, how you send Labradors to training school, service dogs. What's the ratio of rats that get trained that actually make it all the way?
We actually have a really great success rate. So last year, we only had about a 6% dropout or attrition rate. So those are rats that are entered the training program and for whatever reason, just we're not going to have a career in that. But lately, we've also developed a really successful program of reassigning rats to another career. Mm-hmm. So a rat that's not doing well at TV detection might actually be a stellar landmine detection rat. Mm. So we've done that. We've taken rats that are failing from one program and placed them in another.
It's like going to college and they don't like that career.
So you get an area that has landmines, like somebody will say, there's this area with landmines. Can you bring in the rats?
Yeah, so there's basically 3 main stages to mine action. The first one is called non-technical survey. And this is based on sort of oral history. The community says, no, nobody goes over there because, 20 years ago, Bob found a landmine or something. So this is the oral history. It's not technical. Once you have an idea of where the mines are, minefields are, you then come in for technical survey. And in technical survey, you use different tools to sample a small percentage of the land. And you're looking for evidence that there is an explosive there. If you find that evidence, you now come in for clearance. And that's where you're going to search every inch of that land for any possible explosive. So we at Apopo are actually involved in that whole process. And it's not until that final stage of clearance that we would bring in the rat.
So when you bring in the rat for clearance, once the rat identifies where a landmine is, what happens?
So the rat will scratch at the surface. The handlers will take a small placard and set it down. And they'll mark how many meters in is the rat where it's indicating, where it's scratching. And then everyone steps a safe distance back. So I actually visited our operations in Cambodia and got to see this in action. So it's kind of an eerie moment where, the hair is standing up on your arms, the rat just scratched at something and everybody's moving way back. Then a metal detector will come in and search that area, and she slowly worked her way in. And if it starts binging right where the rat scratched, she'll take a probe, a special device, to kind of scratch away at the surface of the ground gently until it exposes what is there. The one that I saw actually was an unexploded ordnance, so it was like a missile that had not exploded. It wasn't even a landmine, but clearly something very dangerous to have in a farm field. So depending on the operations, it's then detonated on the spot, or it's safely removed and detonated somewhere else.
Were you there when it was detonated?
No, I wasn't.
So when it's going to be detonated, you take the rat and everybody leaves, and then they do what they have to do to make it safe.
That's right. Yeah. So they'll secure the whole area. In a lot of these areas, the minefields are butting right up to the communities. So these are typically resource poor parts of the world that need the land for agriculture. And so, their farmland might actually butt right up and overlap with the minefield. So part of safely detonating it is determining, can you do it on location or does it need to be moved? And if it's on location, you have to make sure the entire area is secure.
So if that's going to happen, does the rat go and identify 5 places and then leave, or does it just do one place and leave?
That's a good question. We'll actually finish searching the whole area that was plotted out for the day. So if anything else is found as well, then once everybody has left for the day, all of those things will be safely removed. So as soon as there's a confirmed device, then there's lots of signage that's put up that says, completely avoid this area, but operations continue.
Do you remember your first time? I'm sure you do, that you went out on, you're training, and then you went to the landmine and, went to the minefield. And what was that feeling like of going to Cambodia or wherever you went where the mines were?
Yeah, Cambodia for my first time. To be honest, I was really excited because I wanted to see my rat in action and what it was like. At first, it totally felt like this is typical. This is our training situation. But then when you see the children playing right next door, it starts to kind of hit home. And then when the rat did find something, it was very interesting to go to sleep that night. But I was very proud and I was happy to step on that minefield the next day. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to think about is we work successively in the minefield. So you'll start at the border and you'll clear that. And then the next day, you move in deeper. So the area you're walking on today is the area your rat cleared yesterday. So you have to trust your rat every time you step into that minefield, because everywhere you are walking, your rat has searched.
Do you deploy one rat, or do like 5 rats go? And how many trainers have to go with each rat? Do they back in, what do you keep them in, a truck or something? And they have other rats with them? Like how does it, because I imagine they're social animals,
Yeah, they are. They're naturally social, not as much as other rodent species, but they are. So they're transported together in smaller transport cages where they have bedding and water, and then they're kept in a little shade enclosure. Each handler works with 1 rat at a time, so it takes 2 handlers per rat, but a team of handlers may work with 5 rats each. So for a team clearing a minefield, you might have 10 or 15 rats working that day.
When they identify a landmine, do you give them a little banana right then? Like, what is that reward system? How does that work?
That's the rough part, is we actually can't reward them in operation because the rat has to be removed. We have to come in with a metal detector. By the time we confirm the rat was right, he's completely forgotten what he's done. If we give him a reward then, he's like, oh, great, I get treats for just sitting around. Okay. If you give him a reward when he scratches, if there wasn't something there, he's going to quickly start scratching everywhere.
Okay.
So we can't actually reward him in the minefield. But what we do is once a week, take him to a training field where we know where the mines are at. And if he scratches in the correct spot there, he gets his reward. So that keeps him motivated to play the game.
Do the rats have names, or are they just rats?
No, each one has his own name.
Like, what are some of the names?
Well, my favorite rat, because you asked if we have favorites, my favorite rat was Courage. And he was my favorite because of his personality. He was a very large rat. If you scratched his back, he would arch it and lean into you, kind of like a dog might do, or a cat.
Yeah.
He was super friendly. He was a superstar in our mine detection training. And then he went on to do operations, and I just thought the name Courage was really fitting for that. But we have a whole host of names, from football players, movie stars, singers, to like family members. Sometimes it's themes. So the trainers usually get to name their rats.
Mhm.
So when they get assigned a rat, they have the privilege of naming it. So there's a big variety.
How many are there? Like, how many are you training at the same time?
Well, so right now here at our training headquarters, we have 175 rats.
Wow.
Not all of them are in training. Some are involved in research projects, some are in our breeding program, and some are retired. I have 45 rats currently in mine detection training that we are training every single day.
So what kind of person comes and works there? How does a person apply, and what kind of selection criteria are you looking for in the trainers?
Well, for Apoko, we really are a humanitarian organization, and we believe in local solutions. So the rat not only is local, but also the handlers are. So all of our handlers are from the surrounding communities. They have usually the equivalent of about a middle school or high school education. There isn't really an opportunity to study animal learning and behavior in African colleges. So we provide all of that training on the job. And we have our own internal accreditation, also exams for our handlers. And we're like a family. So some of our handlers have been with Apoko since we moved here in the year 2000. And they just mentor and teach the younger generation.
So tuberculosis is a complicated thing to test if you're in a place with few resources. So how do you even get to the idea that a rat might do that, might be able to detect that?
So we have a lot of ongoing research at all times. So we have three main departments for Apoko. One is our mine action. The other is now TB detection. And the third is our research and development or innovation. So you might imagine we get contacted all the time with people saying, can your rats be trained for this, or what about that? And if I understand correctly, that's how TB started. That began in 2003 as a research project. And it's always a phased project. So you start with proof of principle and kind of a controlled laboratory environment. Is there a unique smell associated with this disease? Can the rat be trained to detect it? And then you scale up from there.
So a unique smell, difficult for you. You don't have a machine necessarily that'll quantify the smell. So how do you identify what that smell might be?
This is one of the great things I think about in this line of research is that we are also learning from the rats. So the rats are helping patients by detecting that they have the disease, but they're also informing science by telling the scientist what is it that is unique. Because if you put a sample through technology like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, it's going to give you spikes for things that are present. But those spikes might be different between patients or different varying degrees of the disease and infection. But somehow the rat has developed a concept of what is the odor profile. And so we can ask the rat, is this TB or not? We can confirm it with World Health Organization confirmatory diagnostics, and then we can run it through something like GCMS.
So are you doing that with patients or, volunteers or, how do you get a group of people who have, tuberculosis?
So now what I was just describing was sort of research angle. We also have opportunities where we are helping patients every day. So we partner with local health clinics. These are short course treatments. So patients come in with symptoms of TB. The clinics themselves will screen the patient for TB and they'll run diagnostics. So in resource support areas, that's typically microscopy. So you take a sputum sample, like a phlegm from the lungs, and you try to look under the microscope to see if you can identify the bacteria. That's really difficult. After that is done, we then collect all of the samples from that partner clinic, bring it back to our lab, and present them to the rats. If the rats indicate a sample that the clinic said, yes, this is positive, we click and give them the banana and reward them. If the rat indicates the sample that the clinic said was negative, we flag that sample, we take it back into our lab, and we run more sensitive diagnostics on it, like concentrated smear microscopy And if the rat was right, we call up the clinic and let them know so that the very next day the patient can be put on treatment. So with this model, our rats have found over 20,000 patients that were originally misdiagnosed.
Amazing.
Oh my goodness, that is incredible.
So you train them for TB, but now why not train them for cancer? Why not train them for, Alzheimer's? Why not train them for all sorts of things?
There's not really a great answer for that. And I think that's part of our research and development department is looking at what else can the rat do. Mm-hmm. One thing that we're always looking for is what is unique about the rat. So there are things that maybe a dog is better suited for doing. The rat's nose may be just as sensitive, but he can't do the sorts of things a dog can do. But on the flip side, maybe the rat can do things that the dog can't do. And the same for disease detection. Maybe there is rapidly developing diagnostic tools that are helping that the rat really won't be able to play a role in. But we are certainly always looking for those opportunities.
So do you attend a conference where you bring a rat and somebody brings a dog and other people, because smell is this very, misunderstood area, or I would say unexplored area. So is there a place where different strategies are coming together so you can go, well, hey, maybe we're better at that, or you could do that part?
It is a lot of different conferences. I wouldn't say that there's a single conference that you would go to for this. And in the world, as far as I know, Opopo is the only organization training scent detection rats. So we look to the rest of the community of scent detection animals to see what are the strengths and weaknesses, but all sorts of scent detection technologies. So even electronic noses and machine learning algorithms, and I mentioned even laboratory analysis equipment.
Are we seeing advances with machine learning or scent detection, devices? Are we seeing as many advances in that as we see just in training a rat?
Well, that's a tricky question. I think that there is a lot of potential for further developments there, but there have certainly been a lot of advances. The big difference is what it is you're trying to detect. So if it's a relatively simple odor profile or chemical compound molecule that you're looking for, it's easier to train something like an electronic nose or a machine learning algorithm to identify it. The case of TB is so complex that we really don't know what would be the signal to train that apparatus to look for. So that's where we're getting insights from the rat that could then inform further development there.
Has this protocol ever, how far back does it go? I mean, that historically, are people using animals hundreds of years ago? I mean, it just seems, how do we figure this out? Or how did scientists figure this out? That this could be a way that the sense of smell in animals could detect, disease or danger?
That's a fascinating question. I actually haven't even thought of that angle of what's the history of scent detection animals. Because, my background before joining Opopo was more on psychology and neuroscience and biology and ethology. So certainly from those angles, we know that the relationships between humans and animals drove domestication, and that there was clearly some symbiotic relationship there that led to that. And from the psychology side, we know like classical conditioning from Pavlov at the turn of the century. So he was clearly on to identifying that the dogs could recognize things in the environment and make predictions and have expectations about what would happen next from that. And how that all translated into scent detection, I actually don't know.
It strikes me that it's a symbiotic relationship between the animals and humans, and that maybe we don't spend enough time focused. We're always thinking about technology as a machine doing a thing, or, as you mentioned, machine learning or AI. But in a lot of ways, understanding the world around us can help us detect things easier that might help more people. I mean, how do you think about the relationship of these animals to the some of these questions we're trying to ponder?
It's so complex and so fascinating. because on one level, we've already changed perspectives about the rat, right? So I mentioned it was originally the pest here. And now we actually have local farmers bringing us rats that they've caught and asking us to train them. And we have, handlers around the world who have, maybe even eaten rats in some parts of the world. It's considered bushmeat. And now after working with their rats, they say, I will never do that again because the rats are so smart and they're saving our lives. Our handlers and trainers also really treat the rats like they're their coworkers. So we are always interested in their welfare and learning from them. So, in one perspective, we're training the rats to do this, but they're also changing and training people to respect them as well. And one of my favorite research projects we have going on right now is actually training the rats to detect illegally smuggled wildlife. And I love the thought of the rat helping out fellow non-humans as well, like helping to find other animals and save them.
Now, how do you go about solving a problem like that? Because there's so much, the pangolin, I imagine, smells different than a parrot, so how do you even go about that kind of thing,
So we've found that our rats can learn multiple odor targets. So for the wildlife detection, they've already been trained to find 5 different animal specimens. Wow. Well, I shouldn't say specimens. When we say specimens, we usually mean animals within a product, right? So pangolin scales is like a target, but you might have 5 different pangolins that contributed their scales to this, right? Mm-hmm. So we have 5 different wildlife targets that our rats have been trained to detect. So while they're searching, if they happen to find any one of them, they can let us know. So some things are close to each other, and so the rat might generalize. That can work in your favor or against you. Like pangolin scales kind of smell a little fishy. So you might have the rat falsely alarming on some seafood. So we have to carefully take that into consideration in our training. But other things, it just means that we have to have access to lots of different samples to train the rat with them. I always talk about with the pangolin project, the specimens, we can't just train the rat on one pangolin because that pangolin is, let's say, Pangolin Joe. And Pangolin Joe is never going to be smuggled again. Our rats have to find Pangolin Jan. So it's got to be able to tell the difference between individuals or across individuals of what makes it a pangolin.
Have you deployed that yet?
No, that's still in the development stage. So we're hoping to do some trials next year within the port to have the rats actually searching the containers.
Such amazing work, really incredible. Thank you for sharing with us, Cindy. It's really amazing,
And let's everyone who's watching and interested, a popo, just go and search the incredible work that they do, because it is really something. It's just brilliant. And I don't think I'll think about a rat the same way ever again. I'm happy to say thanks to you.
And Cindy, as you do these projects, please let us know. Come back on and talk to us about, as you're advancing to a new thing. We'd love to keep in touch and know what you're up to.
Certainly, it's been a pleasure. I thank you so much for having me. We'd love to keep in touch. Also, if it's okay, maybe I could give a small plug out there. So Popo is a nonprofit. So a lot of our activities are just from public support. So we actually have an adoption program where anybody can sponsor a mine detection or TB detection rat. You can do just a one-time sponsorship donation, or you can even do a recurring monthly donation. So for more information on that, if anybody's interested, you can just check out our website. It's apopo.org.
Fantastic. Thank you,
so
Cindy,
much.
very much.
Wonderful.
Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you.